Tonight, we take you to Malawi, a country where the ballot box has become less about fresh choices and more about familiar faces. For over a decade, two men have defined the nation's political rhythm. Lazarus Chakwera, the preacher turned president who promised to resurrect Malawi's fortunes, and Peter Mutharika, the professor who spent years abroad before returning to rule, retreat, and at 85, stage one of the most improbable comebacks in African politics. Their rivalry has been biblical in scale and academic in detail. Sermons against statutes, humility against pedigree, pulpit thunder against professorial calm. Malawi's voters have watched as the preacher and the professor traded victories, defeats, and accusations in an endless duel that says as much about the nation as it does about the men themselves. And now, with history looping back yet again, the question remains, is this refreshed leadership or a repeat episode of the same old show? Welcome to Second Take.
Hi everybody, we are at Biltong and Bites today. It is the National Biltong Day tomorrow on the 9th of September, so we thought we will line up some of Namibia's top chefs, ask them for their recipe for a bite, a chili bite. So we've got a lot of bites, but only one of them are chilies. So now we want more chili bite options. So we've invited the chefs. We are very proud to have them together. They spiced, we dried, and now we have a tasting today. So we hope to identify the best bite, and then we will add it to the Biltong and Bites menu as the chef's choice. So the number one bite that we just nominated now as the best is the Smoky Joe. And that was made for us by Chef Pedro Cesar from Drombos. Well done, congratulations. I think there's a profile of customer that will be interested in each and every single one of these bites. So definitely I think it will add value to the profile and the spread and the variety of bites in the Biltong and Bite shop.
Malawi in the 2010s resembled a stage play written by a drunk theater student with Tipex in one hand and a Bible in the other. On one side stood Lazarus Chakwera, a preacher who swapped pulpits for podiums, hoping sermons about servant leadership would translate into governance. His parents in the dusty ridges of Malembo named him after the biblical Lazarus, proof that in Malawi even names carry divine pressure. When you're named the one who came back from the dead, you don't get to retire quietly. You either resurrect economies or keep trying until the grave refuses you entry. Chakwera's life story sounded like a morality play spliced with a recruitment video for Bible school. Born in 1955 in a subsistence farming family, the young Lazarus was taught faith before he was taught fractions. His parents lost two children in infancy, and so when they named him Lazarus, it wasn't just biblical, it was a dare to fate. He grew up between farm chores and the weight of expectation that he would outlive poverty, hunger, and the curse of colonial leftovers. He attended Malembo Primary and Mtendere Secondary, where an American teacher gave him the now famous accent, an accent so polished it sometimes sounds like it had applied for a U.S. green card of its own. His accent sounds like Africans lost the liberation struggle to Texas. His accent sounds like it's ready to order burgers, fries, and a gun over the counter. His accent sounds like it supplies arms to a genocidal Israel. Okay, I'm done. After graduating with a philosophy degree, this was in 1977, Chakwera doubled down on theology. and honors from the University of the North, and then a master's from the University of South Africa in 1991. While most Malawians were still trying to master the art of avoiding blackouts, Lazarus was mastering theology, ready to explain the metaphysical meaning of every pothole in Lilongwe. By 1989, he was president of the Malawi Assemblies of God, holding that office for nearly a quarter of a century. If sermons could cure hunger, Malawi would have been Switzerland by 2010. But in 2013, Lazarus left the pulpit for politics. He became the first Malawi Congress Party leader not connected to Hastings Kamuzu Banda, the dictator who ruled Malawi like a stern uncle who confiscates your toys and then lectures you about obedience. Chakwera positioned himself as the antidote to corruption and tribalism. He told Malawans he would lead like a servant, though the irony is that, servants in Malawi are usually underpaid, invisible, and blamed for everything when things go missing. Enter Peter Mutharika, the professor, the sibling, the man who had spent more time outside Malawi than most Malawians had spent inside working lights. Born in 1940 in Tuyolo, Peter was almost 15 years older than Lazarus, practically a generation apart. Where Chakwera's destiny was shaped by sermons and soil, Mutharika's was shaped by lecture halls and law books. He studied law at the University of London, then polished his mind at Yale with a master's and PhD in international law. Later, he even taught as the Charles Nagel Professor for International Comparative Law. That title alone sounded so heavy that by the time you finished reading it, Malawi would already have lost another 10 million kwacha to corruption. Mutharika lived abroad for decades, earning awards, sitting on arbitration panels, all the while somehow maintaining the same accent. 3 children, 1 professorial career, and a shelf of international recognition later, he returned to Malawi, co-founding the Democratic Progressive Party with his brother Bingu. By 2009, Peter was Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, then later Minister of Education, Science and Technology, then Foreign Affairs. Basically, every portfolio you need to look busy while your country keeps queuing for fuel. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, he was tasked with mending ties with the UK, which had collapsed after a diplomatic spat. The fact that he was chosen to fix it tells you everything. He was the quiet brother, the rational one, the one less likely to call Queen Elizabeth rude names in public. So there they were, the preacher with a name too heavy to fail and the professor with a resume too long to ignore. Their first real clash was 2014. Mutharika scraped through with 36.4% against Chakwera's 30.7%. Allegations of irregularities floated around like mosquitoes, but Chakwera, still dressed in political humility, refused to challenge it in court. He said he wanted to give Mutharika a chance to govern. In Malawi, this was treated as saintly restraint. In satire, we call it the first mistake, because politics is not Sunday school. It's poker played with people's livelihoods. 2014 set the tone. The professor claimed the State House, the preacher conceded, and Malawians prepared for another half-decade of promises that would age faster than tomatoes in the sun. The rivalry was officially born, though no one yet realized it would become the defining soap opera of Malawi's democratic years. One man with a Bible, one man with law books, both convinced that destiny had reserved the presidential chair exclusively for them. The preacher had lost but refused to sue. The professor had won but barely, and the nation sighed, knowing full well that both men would be back for the sequel. By 2019, Malawi's democracy had turned into a stationery shop scandal. The presidential tally sheets came back looking like a child's homework where every wrong answer was corrected with Tipex. Yeah, Mutharika was declared winner again, but the courts, tired of their robes being used as handkerchiefs for political sneezes, annulled the election. Malawi joined Kenya in the rare African tradition of courts telling presidents to sit down and shut up. An unexpected democratic muscle flexed by a nation most outsiders confused with where Madonna shops for children. The annulment wasn't just legal history. It was comedic tragedy. Imagine telling Malawans who already had to queue for sugar, salt, fuel, and maize that now they had to queue for justice again. And they did in 2020 with a rerun that gave Chakwera his Lazarus moment. From pulpit to presidency, he built a coalition called the Tonse Alliance, a Noah's Ark of 9 political parties, including Saulos Chiliba's UTM. They marched together like a wedding procession no one thought would last beyond the honeymoon. The rerun was decisive. Chakwera, 59%, Mutharika, 40%. A preacher resurrected, a professor rejected. For the first time since independence, Malawans felt like democracy wasn't just a borrowed suit from the West, but something that could actually fit. The international community applauded as if Malawi had just invented voting. For Malawans, the real applause was reserved for the possibility that finally corruption would be tackled, hunger reduced, and power blackouts remembered only as ghost stories. But by 2021, the applause faded. COVID-19 hit, cyclones wrecked livelihoods, and inflation laughed at campaign promises. Chilima, the once charismatic deputy, was arrested on corruption charges in 2024 before being cleared. The Tonse Alliance fractured, its unity proving as fragile as the plastic chairs used at their rallies. Chakwera's government expanded to a 32-member cabinet, bloated, expensive, and proof that his servant leadership had disappeared behind a tomb opening. Mutharika, meanwhile, sat in retirement like an old lion licking wounds, yet growling at every news headline. In 2022, he accused Chakwera of running Malawi into the ground. His critiques found an eager audience because when the lights go out and food prices triple, citizens suddenly remember the devil they knew might at least have kept the candles cheaper. So the man who had been mocked as the Tipex president, the professor who had once been chased out of State House by democratic erasers, began to look like a reasonable alternative. Malawans asked themselves, would you rather have the preacher's sermons about moral rebirth or the professor's lectures on fiscal stability? It was a question of whether you wanted hope or food, light or prayer, sermons or forex. And by 2024, the answer was tilting back to the professor. By 2024, Malawans were not asking whether they could eat democracy. They were asking whether they could at least cook it with the electricity that kept disappearing. Inflation ballooned past 30%, forex vanished, and queues for fuel stretched longer than Sunday sermons. Chakwera, once a preacher of hope, had become the embodiment of biblical job, except instead of losing cattle, he lost credibility. His Tonse Alliance splintered like cheap firewood, and he presided over a nation where 5.7 million faced acute hunger. It wasn't all failure. His administration launched irrigation projects in Mzimba, electrified 9,000 homes, and pushed the Inkosi Yamakosi Mbelwa University forward. He introduced youth loans and food aid and improved some roads. But when people are choosing between maize flour and soap, they don't want to hear about dual carriageways. Chakwera spoke of transformation, but people listened to the sound of empty pots. Mutharika smelled opportunity. At 84, his candidacy looked like a joke, the resurrection of geriatrics. Yet in Malawi, where disillusionment is the only renewable resource, voters reasoned, better an old man with a record of 5% GDP growth than a preacher with endless excuses. His own scandals, from the cement import saga to acid freezes, faded in collective memory. His Democratic Progressive Party rallied, and in a move that could only be described as satirical self-parody, Mutharika chose Jane Ansah, the very MEC chair once accused of mismanaging elections, as his running mate. Malawans groaned, but they also shrugged. After all, this was a nation that once annulled an election with Tipex. Perhaps irony was just part of the constitution now. By the end of 2024, Mutharika was back on the campaign trail, frail in body but sharp in rhetoric. He promised stability, forex, and food, basic things that had become luxury items. Crowds returned to his rallies, not out of nostalgia, but out of desperation. The preacher had been weighed and found wanting. The professor, though visibly elderly, carried the illusion of competence, and it was enough. September 16, 2025 arrived with 76% of voters queuing, proof that Malawans are still romantics in the theater of disappointment. By September 24, the Electoral Commission declared Mutharika winner with nearly 57%, a first-round triumph. Chakwera, now the preacher conceding defeat, admitted the lead was insurmountable. It was a fourth duel, a democratic boxing match where both men had tasted victory and humiliation. But this time, the professor outlasted the preacher. Even Lilongwe, Chakwera's supposed fortress, voted blue. Analysts called it a protest vote, a people rejecting sermons in favor of stability, even if it came in a wheelchair. At 85, Mutharika became one of Africa's oldest elected leaders, outliving mockery, scandal, and the biblical irony of defeating a man literally named Lazarus. His task ahead: stabilize forex, tame inflation, feed the starving, and prove that age is not just a number, but also a potential power outage. Malawi had achieved a third straight peaceful transfer of power, a milestone on paper, but the satire was clear. A nation that once annulled an election for Tipex had chosen to re-elect history itself. The preacher was gone, the professor was back, and the audience was left to wonder whether this resurrection was salvation or simply the recycling of Malawi's endless political script. Now, just after Mutharika was announced as the winner of the Malawian election, I had a conversation with a journalist in Malawi, Mr. Karen Iron Musiska, not just a journalist, a communication specialist for 17 years in Lilongwe, and he gave us the breakdown of what this election actually means on the ground for Malawans.
The Mutharika brand was repeatedly being mentioned as proven leadership. So proven leadership in the sense that when people sat down and compared Mutharika and Chakwera, they saw Mutharika as a better devil. So there were some options. We had former President Joyce Banda, who took over from the late Bingwa Mutharika immediately after his death in 2012. She has performed very miserably. Then in came also Daliso Kabambe, who moved from the Democratic Progressive Party of Peter Mutharika to succeed late Samuel Oscar Chilima as the UTM party president. There were high expectations that he could do a little bit better actually push these two and will even being the option for the two, veteran Mutharika and Lazarus Chakwera. But the performance on the ground has just been that very miserable. It's scooped a little under 10% of the votes, very far away from even 20%. So the options were there, but I should believe people wanted quick solutions to the current problems, and they did not see the alternatives as solutions to the prevailing problems. But so that solution in Peter Mutharika, and I should believe that maybe going forward in 2030 and the like, DPP must not sit on their laurels to say we managed to get back government, and then going forward we are going to enjoy the popularity of the Malawians. I don't believe that, and I should believe 2030 will really be an interesting election for Malawians.
That's actually the question that I wanted to follow up with, because you are a veteran communication specialist and journalist who has observed the environment for years and years with regards to politics in Malawi. Your instincts, what are they telling you? Is this a one-term president?
Mutharika is 86, and they say, but his age is quoted as 85, 86, but he's 86. By what himself said in 2015. I don't think he would be in a position to stand again in 2030. One, because he will be 91. And then secondly, he will have completed his 2 terms as president. The Malawian constitution guarantees only 2 terms of office, be it consecutively or you skip one in between and come and back to complete another 5 years. So, to answer the question, yes, this should be a one-term presidency. And then if you look at his vice president, the retired Justice of Appeal, Jane Asa Senior Counsel, she's in her 70s. I don't know if the Democratic Progressive Party will still stick with her to say front the party, or they're going to look for another candidate to represent it in the forthcoming elections. As for the Malawi Congress Party, why I'm saying it is going to be an interesting election is because UTM party has significantly improved on its 2019 performance as regards parliamentary representation. I think they have 24 members of parliament from this election. In 2019, they had 4. So in 2019, they performed reasonably well on the presidential stake, but the performance was very poor on the parliamentary side. This time, the presidential performance has been pathetic, but they've done really well on the parliamentary side. So I believe if they can stick together, they could be one of the options to consider seriously in the 2030 elections. For Malawi Congress Party, Lazarus Chakwera is in his 3rd term as president for the party. The party provides for 2 terms. He was given a 3rd mandate because he was a sitting president. So they don't go to a convention and then replace the president who is the national president. They gave him that chance. So I don't think he's going to stay. The party will definitely elect another president to represent it in 2030. So looking at the background I just provided, so in 2030, we might have 2 newcomers from the DPP and the Malawi Congress Party, which are the bigger parties, and then someone who is already known in the name of Dariso Kababi, who is will be going into his 2nd term as president for the UTM party, and being someone who represented the party during the 2025 elections. So come 2030, we are going to have at least a battle that will go to either of the 3 parties, UTM, MCP, and Malawi Congress Party, based on how one, UTM stays together and then rebuilds, and then secondly, how the Democratic Progressive Party decides on who to replace Mutharika, and then thirdly, how the Malawi Congress Party quickly comes out of this defeat, rebuilds, rebrands, and markets itself ahead of the 2030 election. So it's really going to be something interesting.
So here we are, Malawi in 2025, where Peter Mutharika has resurrected his career at 85 and Lazarus Chakwera has conceded with a preacher's grace. The professor reclaims the podium. The preacher has bowed out, and Malawians are left with the uneasy déjà vu of déjà vu. What this saga reveals is bigger than two men. It's about a nation caught between sermons of reform and the caution of experience, between generational hopes and recycled leaders. The preacher believed in resurrection. The professor performed it. And Malawi, faithful audience that it is, keeps buying tickets for the same play. But here's the thing. Every encore in politics comes at the expense of tomorrow's script. If the nation doesn't start writing new characters into its story, then everybody is going to get a second take. Good night.